After the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, people from all over the world came to pay their respects to the fallen president, placing flowers and cards at Dealey Plaza. The cards were given to the Dallas Public Library for preservation. On January 19, 1964, Rabbi Levi Olan used his radio broadcast series, the Temple Emmanuel program, to reflect on Dallas's role in the tragedy and to attempt to address its citizens' grief and guilt over the loss.
Jerusalem in the year 520 BC was a city despised and scorned by the surrounding nations. She had been decimated by enemies, and those of her children who had returned to her from exile were weak and fearful. As is so often the case in the Bible, it is at this point that a prophet appears to console the people and challenge them to a new greatness. Zechariah, a prophet of vision, speaks to Jerusalem in her hour of dismay. So the angel that spoke with me said unto me, Proclaim thou, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I am jealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with a great jealousy. She has not forsaken of God, who loves her and will guard her. This is the text to be spoken to Dallas, who today sits solitary and confused. Reproaches aimed at her from far and near. Her people are ashamed, resentful, and distraught. The glamour of Big D is tarnished. In the confusion of tongues which follow the hour when tragedy struck, the mayor of Dallas spoke to the citizens in the language of the Bible. It has occurred to me, he said, these past few days, that perhaps we have spoken too proudly of ourselves. If our deeds are deeds of true accomplishment, we will have so served our nation and our world that we will not need to call attention to our works. I call upon the churches and synagogues for such devotion to our faith that they will speak to us with utmost candor, both of ideals of truth and of the shortcomings of our community, so that we may be guided into the paths of right. I call upon the people to bear every means of strengthening our moral fiber and to make ours a community of tolerance and understanding. Now, this is a call in a style of a prophet, and this sermon is a response. The text for us is a paraphrase of Zechariah. I am jealous for Dallas with a great jealousy. The first question which must be resolved is in the realm of psychology. Is Dallas guilty of anything because the president of our country was assassinated on her streets? In the beginning, there was a strong current of guilt, which the mayor's prophetic call expressed in noble terms. Many people felt that there was something frightfully wrong with the city, and some wanted to face the truth. This mood is passing. Now there is a growing resentment of all criticism from without and within the gates. The present tone is that of rejecting all responsibility and disclaiming all guilt. Dallas, it is said, is no different than other cities and better than many. The assassin was not one of our citizens. He could have chosen any other city to commit his terrible crime. The people want desperately to forget the tragedy and to go on with the business of living as though nothing had happened here. There is just enough truth in what is being said now in Dallas to lead the city astray and into a serious psychological danger. The people of this city did not pull the trigger, and they are certainly not assassins. In many other cities in the nation, there are irrational and irresponsible citizens for whom a whole community cannot be blamed. This is so obviously true that it blinds us to the distinctive character of Dallas, which makes a vital difference. Before the president came to our city, we were apprehensive. The law enforcing officers were pleading with the citizens on radio and television and in the newspapers to behave decently and to discourage anyone who could cause an incident. The reception prepared by the leaders of the community was almost tinged with guilt. It looked as though we were protesting our love a little too much. The atmosphere was prepared by the best techniques of modern public relations. Yet the unexpressed mood was quietly spoken by one of the leading citizens. "I wish," he said, "he were here and gone already. I would feel better." We were all afraid of an incident, never dreaming, of course, that it would take the tragically irrational form of assassination by a Marxist lunatic. Behind our apprehension lay the fact that we had become the number one spot in the nation for intolerance. We had been put to shame several times by rudeness, crude manners, and even violence. It is not uncommon for the President of the United States to visit communities hostile politically to him, but we were afraid of an incident, the word which was first used in the announcement of the assassination to the audience waiting eagerly for him to arrive. The fact is that we are like all other cities, with this difference, however. We were troubled and anxious lest something should happen. There is a psychological axiom which holds that when a disturbed patient accepts responsibility and blame for his behavior and attempts to do something about it, the prognosis is good. When, however, a patient tends to rationalize away his behavior and to justify it, the prognosis appears to be poor. The present mood of Dallas, which is one of rejecting responsibility and blame, is essentially the great psychological danger confronting the city. Time is an important factor here, and the longer the delay in assuming responsibility, the worse the prognosis. William James years ago wrote that if something is not done very quickly for harnessing an aroused emotion for action, the emotion gets dulled and dissipated and nothing comes of it. The critical error of the moment is the substitution of a partial truth for the whole. The nation as a whole is frustrated in many areas of its life. The increasing manufacture of atom bombs all over the world has reduced us to impotence. Furthermore, we have been made powerless because we just cannot make war anymore. And then, this is a time of change and violent revolutions. The have-nots all over the world are inspired with rising expectations. The old values of religion, family, and society are in radical transition. Power structures are in rapid transformation. Capital in corporate form is confronted by labor in equal corporate power. The government is playing a more prominent role as against the lessened opportunity of each person. Civil rights are dynamically on the move, introducing social patterns totally new. Many people all over the country fear and resent it all. Some are so shaken that they assume an extreme position. The majority are very anxious and want to stop the rapid process of change. Thus, there is tension in many places and on many fronts. Dallas partakes in this national feeling of anxiety and uncertainty. It is like the rest of the nation in this regard. There is, however, one difference. It is more so. Why this is so is not too clear. Why we have become a haven for the extreme expression of the mood of anxiety has not been carefully studied. It is true that there is a great concentration of fabulous wealth in the hands of a few. But this is surely an inadequate explanation. Why is the possibility of an incident more characteristic of us than of other cities? Unless we face up to the whole truth, our prognosis psychologically is poor. The second question after this, which the city must answer, is the ethical question. What is now evident is that the value system by which Dallas lives is open to criticism. There are generally 4 categories of ethical codes by which men behave. The first, and perhaps the highest, is the humanistic, in which the individual identifies himself with the highest social good. He sees the larger purposes of life beyond his own desires and devotes himself to their being fulfilled. He lives by humanitarian goals because they are the reason for his existence as a human creature. Now, the second category is the religious code of worth, expressed for us in the Judeo-Christian heritage of ideals. The third is the legal system of values, which in our country is expressed by laws, which are the result of legislation with the Supreme Court as the final arbiter of constitutionality. And the fourth, and certainly the lowest ethical code, is the personal. This is the value system where a person does that which benefits him personally. It is, in almost all of its expressions, self-aggrandizing. There are very few of us who reach the highest category, the humanistic ethical. It is a rare man who sees his purpose in life to be the advancement of the social good. The religious system of the values, which once played an important role in history, is today, one must say, without influence. Can be said with justice that the church and the synagogue reflects the culture of the people. It rarely speaks to the conscience of the time. The legal ethical system is today much to the forefront, and for some the law of the land is either the law of God or the highest value. There are many, however, who reject the law of the land code of ethics. Fourth category, the personal, is probably the most popular of our time. Many people determine their behavior in answer to the question, what is there in it for me? Here again, Dallas is like the rest of the nation, only more so. The integration of the schools was achieved not because the law of the land required it, not because God is the father of all children without distinction of color, and not because brotherhood is a noble value. Token integration was accepted because it paid off in dollars and cents. The examples of Little Rock and New Orleans were not lost upon the practical minded of the city. We chose the fourth and the lowest of the ethical codes as our guide. Consider our city, which boasts of great wealth, high fashion, fabulous bank buildings, and luxurious palatial homes. Yet 1/5 of the residential area is a slum, has been officially condemned as unfit for decent human habitation. In this Big D, the local paper recently reported that many children do not go to school because they cannot afford to bring a lunch or buy one. The writer for a Dallas Morning News reports that Texas is the lowest of all the states in its aid to dependent children. The national average is $2.81. In Texas, it is 41 cents. In a city not afraid to boast of its high place in finance and business, the people accept a public school system which is certainly not competing for top position in the nation. The dropout percentage of Dallas is one which ought to frighten any responsible community. 30% of the white students and over 50% of the colored drop out of high school after they enter. The university in our city, which has celebrated a half-century of service, is starved for funds and neglected by the community when it cries for a chance to meet the urgent needs of modern education. In an attempt to maintain even a modest level of artistic enterprise, an art fund was created. It failed miserably in its drive for support. This failure to accept responsibility for the good city, this is not unique with Dallas, of course. Many cities are in the same class. What is different and appalling is that we accept a lower level of ethics on a platform of high idealism. The child who cannot have a lunch could be provided for if we accepted the national program of aid for these children. But on high principles, we reject government aid and praise individual initiative. But the child, to our shame, has been left without a lunch, and we are left with our so-called high principles. We voted down public housing to help resolve one of the most pitiful, shameful conditions anywhere in the country. We did that also on high principles, refusing all government aid. We gloried in private initiative, but we ourselves go on living in air-conditioned, luxurious apartments, some of which have piped-in champagne, while 10 minutes away are shacks without indoor plumbing, to say nothing of heating or air conditioning. What is crucial in all of this is the painful truth that we are not motivated by humanistic, religious, or even legal values of ethics. We have accepted the fourth category, the personal, the one which begins by asking, what is in it for me? So we do not help the dependent child adequately. We do not feed the hungry child. We do not care about slums and dropouts and second-class culture. These do not fit our self-interest code of values. One of the leading psychologists in the country, in a personal letter, writes, "There are undoubtedly places that are worse than Dallas, but then Dallas was our hope in Texas, the only place where we saw the beginning of a development of some culture. Was this, we are asking ourselves," he writes, "only a front for the fourth category of values? What should Dallas do now? For its psychological well-being, it ought to accept blame and responsibility for its behavior and act upon that now. It is getting later all the time. Its moral climate needs some lifting up so that it can rise above the fourth level of values, which determines all things by what is there in it for me. The church and synagogue are charged with the responsibility of talking to the people, not reflecting their present values. Perhaps to paraphrase the late president, our value system in Dallas ought to be, ask not what Dallas can do for you, but what can you do for Dallas? The nation pauses today to observe the first anniversary of the assassination of its youthful president. The mayor of the city of Dallas, where the tragedy occurred, has asked that the day be one of spiritual reflection. The synagogue instituted the custom of Yahrzeit, which is the annual remembrance of those who have died, about 2,000 years ago. In every corner of the world where Jews dwell, they repair to their houses of worship to recite the mourner's prayer on the anniversary of the death of their beloved. This practice is rooted deeply in the biblical tradition of history. The remembrance of the past is a vital part of the program which aims at bringing near the kingdom of God, a time when men will beat their swords into plowshares and none shall make them afraid. The memory of those who have gone before is not just a sentimental experience of loving devotion. It proclaims the importance of their lives, which were not lived in vain. The experiences of yesterday formed the foundation for a better tomorrow. It is 1 year later. What shall we call to mind as we remember the tragedy which struck with unbelievable swiftness? The questions of who, how, and why we can lay aside. The Warren Report has answered these as best men can answer these. There is a minority who are still searching for a fiendish conspiracy of international proportions. Europeans are accustomed to secret plots in high places and are skeptical of the simple answers this report advances. Most of us, however, are satisfied with the answer of the Commission's report, that it was the act of a deranged and unhealthy mind. It is also too early to attempt for us and to speculate what the meaning, what the influence of the late President's life will be upon history. The future will clarify much which is yet unformed and unclear. What we can do on this occasion is to attempt an assessment of the tragedy from a religious viewpoint. It was a tragedy in the tradition of the Greeks or of Shakespeare. A young leader was felled by an assassin's bullet while he was at the peak of his career. Removed from the feeling of shock and bewilderment by a year, what does the tragedy teach us today? First and perhaps foremost is a dramatic confrontation with the stubborn fact that death is the inevitable and ever-present reality for each of us. Not only is death inevitable, but it can come without advance notice at any moment. In a fleeting speck of time, a young, smiling man was turned from life to death. Undergirding all of our shocked numbness was the realization that any life, yours and mine, may be turned to death with just as little advance notice. It was perhaps the recognition of this somber reality which created the custom of the synagogue Jew to affirm God's presence when he retired at night with the understanding that he may not awake in the morning. But when he did arise, he thanked God for another day. No one owed him this. No one owed him another tomorrow. If he was given a gift of one, it was a gift for which he was grateful. And the sages did teach that a man should live as though each day was his last day on earth. If next year were the last one for us, how would we use it? Now there are some who immediately respond with, well, let's eat, drink, and be merry. And this is understandable as a first reaction, but on second thought, if there are just so many days left, we would want to feast on love with those who mean most to us, wouldn't we? We would prize every moment with them and regret every second apart from them. We might take a look at the heavens, perhaps, the sun, moon, and stars, and see their beauty, something we have not done in a long time, though we've wanted to. We might listen to a Mozart symphony, which gives us an inner glow, look at a Rembrandt painting, stand enraptured before the mystery of genius, or read Tolstoy's War and Peace again to relive once more the wonderful drama of the human journey. If we had only 1 more year to live, we would greedily guard every minute of it, lest it be wasted and go away empty. And it is when we stand at the grave that our values are shaken up. For much that seems important elsewhere appears to be so petty and senseless. At the grave, face to face with death, men become real. The posing and the make-believe fall away, and we are what we are, and usually for a moment, we are our best selves. It is then that the feeling of charity and forgiveness and love well up within us. And if we could take with us the philosophy of life we fashion at the grave, our days would be richer and more meaningful. The fact about us is that death gives life its values, That our years are numbered is true. And because they are, and there are just so many of them and no more, this turns every moment into a precious possession. To waste these gifts is the height of folly. Strange, isn't it, that men get excited about wasting money and are unruffled by wasted days and years. The only death worthwhile is a tragedy, one which comes in the midst of life significant and meaningful. What made the death of the young president tragic was that it was so abundant with life. It was so sudden and swift and heroic. When, however, a man just exists, unaware of the richness and zest of life, his death is meaningless. We sometimes pronounce our judgment by saying, well, his death was a blessing. Life is worthwhile only when death is a tragedy. And let us remember on this first anniversary of a tragedy that this day or this year may be our last. The late president did understand the biblical lines that there is a time to be born and a time to die. And if we resolve to live so that our deaths will be tragedies and not blessings, then even the great tragedy we now remember shall not have come in vain. And we are reminded on this day not only of our own mortality, but of the texture of our nation's life. The tragedy 1 year ago revealed America in its most shining hour. The nation drew together and found strength in the basic unity of the people. Any new leader called in such a moment must face a terrible prospect. But the people of the United States met the test, and the nation rose to hold fast, to remain firm, and to attest our faith that a free people can be stronger than any totalitarian society. Tragedy brought out the best in us. We need not be afraid of freedom. It is also in this moment, however, the moment of such remarkable grandeur, that we also caught a glimpse of the most threatening danger to our existence. The poison of hate which had been coursing haphazardly in our national veins was clearly isolated and visible. There were too many who had become disagreeable in their disagreements. Some groups even drilled in military preparation to subdue the opposition. Epithets of treason and traitor were hurled recklessly and crudely in passion and in bitterness. A group openly organized and dared call itself the American Nazi Party, hoping to transform our nation into an image of Hitler's Germany. Some cried out to impeach the judges when they were dissatisfied with decisions, mindless of this threat to law and order and the encouragement of national anarchy. In that tragic hour, as we summoned our national strength, we also became aware of the poison which had been throbbing in our veins. In an hour of great disagreement over the course of the nation, a sage once said, "Both sides speak the words of the living God, but the decision must be according to the majority. Freedom implies differences and thrives on the exchange of thought and ideas. But once a decision is reached, the law must be respected, lest chaos overwhelm us." Abraham Lincoln spoke in such an hour, time when the nation was torn asunder in war and hatred. He it was who said, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right." Yes, America has great issues yet to be resolved. It is yet to be tested by trials unmatched by the past. And on this anniversary of a tragedy, let us dedicate ourselves to the freedom which is limited only by responsibility. Let us, as the late president said, make the world safe for diversity. And we who live in this city where the tragedy happened are confronted with a special memory on this day. It is now clear for all to see that contrary to the impassioned judgment of that horrible moment, the city is not guilty of the crime. All of the ingenious accusations which were advanced are to be understood as expressions of bitterness of spirit over the tragedy rather than a report of fact. This tragedy, which could have happened anywhere that a diseased mind chooses as his place of operation, the tragedy did happen here. 1 year later, we can see that the problem of guilt is not the issue. The Warren Report has adequately laid that to rest. The most important aspect of those awesome days following the assassination was that the most powerful searchlight man possesses was focused on the city. The picture was flashed to every corner of the world, every flaw, every raw spot, every wrinkle, and every uncleanness was put under a microscope and shown to the world. City of rich palaces and tall towers of commerce were set amidst slums and hovels. The city which enjoyed boasting of itself with a capital letter was revealed as a place where the number of children who drop out of school is a shocking thing. As the powerful light shone upon it, the city, it was learned, had been inhospitable to honorable debate. There was bitterness and hate which did not receive the reprimand which ugliness deserves. In a city where some of the largest churches and synagogues in the world are active, it was discovered that these were not concerned with slums and poverty and hatred or even ethical standards. The people complained that if all of this is true, we are no worse than any cities in the nation. That may be true. But the tragedy happened in our city, and the world's searchlight was upon us. We couldn't hide our defects. On this anniversary, the world's searching light is again upon us, and many are again asking the question, what is Dallas like 1 year later? What has been done to heal the sores, remove the stain, cleanse the dirt? What has happened to the slums, to the dropouts, to the poor, to the church and the synagogue? Seems to be an intense concern with the unfortunate image of the city, which the tragedy projected on the world screen. And so far the effort has been to change the image, not to change the city. In this hour of remembrance, the citizens of this chosen city may reflect with the poet, what makes a city great? Huge piles of stone heaped heavenward? Vast multitudes who dwell within wide circling walls? True glory dwells where glorious deeds are done, where great men rest whose names athwart the dusk of musty centuries gleam like the sun. So may the city that I love be great, till every stone shall be articulate. In this hour of memory, the first anniversary of a tragedy, let us remember that death is the lot of each of us, and yet makes each life worthy. That a nation to be strong must be cleansed of the poison of hate, and that a city chosen by destiny for the tragic drama of our time can become a city of truth and of goodness and of beauty. Amen.